Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Leaders in Conversation. I'm your host, Arielle Johnson, the Executive Director of the DC Charter School Alliance. And today we are talking about public charter school facilities. Yes, the actual buildings where our students attend school. You might wonder why this topic deserves an entire podcast episode. And the answer is that very rarely in any state statute or in practice do we see public charter schools equitably included in a state or city's capital budget. Funding for facilities is not equitable anywhere in the country, but certainly not in DC. And while there is a facilities allotment here to cover some of the costs, it pales in comparison to the $555 million capital budget that DC Public Schools receives. Today, we're going to talk about the tough work it takes to ensure that we keep students safe, warm, and dry in inviting environments and buildings. It is a challenge to drive academic outcomes when your school leader is simultaneously negotiating a lease, managing a construction timeline, and trying to figure out how to finance a facility, often without a roadmap or safety net. This is the reality for charter school leaders across DC every single day. Charter schools do not have access to the same capital funds. Charter leaders must go out into one of the most competitive real estate markets in the country and figure it out on their own, often for the very first time, while running schools, serving families, and fighting for their students. And this inequity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Right now, as the FY27 budget takes shape, the fight for equitable funding for charter schools is as urgent as it's ever been. At the beginning of June, Council had its first vote on the budget. The annual 3.1% facilities allotment was not included. And while they have promised to restore that money in the future, in an election year, we can't be sure that these priorities will be upheld. Today, I'm joined by three people who understand this challenge from very different vantage points. Margie Yeager is the managing partner at Education Forward DC, where she oversees all grant making and grantee support work. Margie has spent her career at the intersection of education, equity, and policy, including serving as chief of staff to DC's Deputy Mayor of Education. She brings both the funder's lens and a deep personal commitment to ensuring every student in DC has access to an excellent education, and she's on our board. Sean Hartnett is the founder and CEO of Statesman College Preparatory Academy for Boys, a DC charter school he launched in 2018 with a singular mission: to create a space where Black and brown boys feel loved, affirmed, and academically challenged. Sean knows firsthand what it means to build something from the ground up and what it costs when the building itself becomes an obstacle. And Eli Ross is the CEO of the Ross Consulting Group and the former Chief Operating Officer of DC Public Schools, where he oversaw operations, compliance, safety, and school services across the entire district. Eli was instrumental in helping the DC Charter School Alliance develop and launch its Facilities Project Playbook, a first-of-its-kind resource designed to help charter leaders navigate one of the most complex challenges in running a school. Together, we're going to have an honest, solutions-focused conversation about what it really takes to give charter school students the spaces they deserve and what happens when we fall short. Let's get into it. Eli, we'll start with you. Okay, so as someone that's worked on this issue for both sectors, can you give us a simple explanation of why public charter schools and DC public schools are treated so differently when it comes to facilities funding? What's the structural gap?
Yeah, I think it's probably best to start with framing of what's the impact. And so you start with DCPS's 6-year capital budget is $2.5 billion. And I can guarantee you that the DC market for charter schools is not spending $2.5 billion over the next 6 years in facilities development and facilities investment. So that frames the issue just in terms of construction. And then if you drop down, DCPS is spending about $60 million a year on maintenance of its 118 school buildings. I guarantee you that's not the level that the charter sector is spending, on a per student basis either. So that kind of frames the issue in terms of where the rubber meets the road of how much dollars are being spent to invest in facilities year over year. From a structural perspective of how did we get here, it's not the most simple answer, but I'll try and distill it in the way that it makes sense to me. DCPS is led by the mayor. And DCPS is the preeminent agency in the district government. It sits at the forefront of resource allocation, management, mayoral attention, council attention as well. And so the performance of DCPS is central to how the mayor is leading the government, because she is ultimately responsible for DCPS's performance, both from a facilities perspective and a student outcomes perspective. And I know firsthand that she takes that very seriously. So we start from that framework. And when you look at the funding allocation that occurs through the budget process that we're going through right now, there's just a really unpleasant truth about the uniform funding for students. It's DCPS is always going to get the number that it needs. And that's what the per pupil funding formula delivers. And then the charter sector is simply a mathematical equation that has to be accounted for in the budget, which is how you got to where we are today with this $60 million gap. It's actually larger than that, but we'll keep it at the $60 million mark for today. There is nobody in the room, budget-wise, that is advocating for the needs of charter schools in a meaningful way. It is always, what is the resource allocation to DCPS? And then what is the corresponding number that means for investment in charter schools? And how do we make that work? And so there's no one in the room that's leading that advocacy in the moment for charter schools when resources are being allocated. And that is part of where this structural gap happens. And it just grows incrementally year over year because charter schools have found a way to deal with the outcomes of the funding that they're given. So all of these things of making it work, charter leaders are really resourceful. But we've kind of come to this inflection point where there's demonstrable inequity that's having a very real impact of just how do you keep the lights on every day. And so that structural gap is really sort of, in my mind, built into the budget process itself, where there needs to be an advocate for the charter schools in the room during the budget development process so that you are having input on how the budget is structured rather than trying to do late-day advocacy on how the budget is impacting you.
So I'm going to push you a little bit. And, you can always say, I don't want to share this. But when you say no one is in the room, you're talking about our government officials who are helping create the budget. How do you envision getting the right folks in those places? One of the things that we're doing with whoever's going to be the mayor, we don't know that yet as of the filming of this podcast. One of the things we're asking them is, who are you going to put in place for OSSE, for the Deputy Mayor of Education, to ensure that there is someone in the room advocating for us? How do you envision that process working?
Yeah, I think you've even got to take it a step further.
Yeah.
Right? Theoretically, all of those people should be advocating for charter schools. The budget process is so intense and so quick on the inside of the DC government that things can get missed. The primary focus is DCPS because it is so complicated and everything kind of falls from what is DCPS's investment that year, both on a capital side and an operating side. What I think should happen is the head of the PCSB should be brought into that as the head of an independent agency that's able to truly just focus on what is the impact to charter schools in a really meaningful way. Letting charter schools submit some kind of budget request of like, this is what we would like to see in the facilities, formula that year. This is what we would like to see in terms of fixed cost analysis. This is what we're seeing the impact to our operations on the front side of that budget development. Because what's happening is that budget is developed, the mathematical equation is done, the money's set aside for charter schools, and then you're trying to play catch up at a time where every single advocacy group is doing the exact same thing. That's why you see the outcome of where we are today. You have a $60 million gap that everybody agrees is unfair, but we're only investing $15 million to make up for it. We're behind the eight ball before we're just not in the room.
And that's before we even address the actual capital budget of $555 million. So I do want to just name a couple things, and then Margie, I'm going to shift to you because I think your perspective on this is really important. Both organizations like Education Forward DC and the DC Alliance, and I think other advocacy orgs, we all present proposed budget asks and requests to the mayor in early January every single year at the request of the mayor's office. But again, having those people in the room to be able to take that request and then take it seriously with some fidelity has always been the challenge. We do this every single year where we end up in June at the end of the school year fighting to get what's really the basic tenets of the law. The budget will, DCPS will predict that budget. However, that's what the law says, right? It's supposed to be that way you do to one side, you do to the other, and that's just not what we're seeing. It hasn't been what we're seeing in per pupil funding, but also in facilities. Margie, I want to turn to you. From a funder's perspective, when you look across the charter landscape, how visible is the facilities challenge, and how's it showing up in your data and conversations with your grantees?
Yeah, unfortunately, facilities is an extremely challenging topic across the city for so many charter leaders. We see it every day, and we hear about it in so many ways. We have folks who are trapped in buildings that are really inadequate for learning, don't have the facilities that they need to support the program model that they operate. We have folks who are trapped in really difficult, expensive leases, and so they end up subsidizing their facilities costs with their operating per pupil. So as Eli was saying, they're taking money away from what should be going to teaching and learning and instead spending it on facilities, which is not how it's supposed to work. We also see folks having to defer maintenance and getting into situations where they have, ailing systems, but they don't have the resources to be able to put to those systems. So all kinds of challenges across the system that we see with our grantees, and it really impacts them in a lot of ways. It takes an enormous amount of time from leaders that I'm sure Sean can speak to in terms of addressing these challenges, time that leaders, again, should be spending on the business of teaching and learning. That's why they're there. It also just impacts teachers and students in their daily learning. I was on a school visit just a couple weeks ago, and we were in a classroom and a really aging HVAC system kicked on, and it was so loud that the children and teacher couldn't hear each other, right? And so it's just a small example of how these facilities issues really play out in the day-to-day reality on the ground in schools. It creates challenges literally in the classroom, and it creates enormous financial and operational challenges. So from a philanthropic perspective, we are taking steps that we can to address it, but philanthropic resources, while they are significant, are never going to be the same level as government resources. So we can try to provide some bridges, but we can never address the fundamental inequity in the system that Eli was speaking to.
Yeah, once we've talked about this before in a previous podcast, some of the fixed cost challenges. So the big issue right now is that there's money that should be in the formula that's been moved to the Department of General Services. It's about $60 million. What does that mean for a charter school, when you say you don't actually have the same fixed costs when you talk about things like a failing HVAC system?
Yeah, so that means that schools just literally don't have the same level of resources that DCPS schools have to address all kinds of issues that come up in their school buildings. So there's a million things that break in the buildings that they're in, and they don't have the same resources to be able to address them. And then, as folks know, if you think even about a home that you own, if you let things go for a long time, later they become even more expensive to fix, right? And the costs build over time. And what might have been a small repair later becomes a large one, but you couldn't afford it in the first place, and then the costs have just escalated. So we see it just creating magnified effects across the system. And the amount of money that charters are getting for facilities per pupil is an annual challenge in advocacy, right? It is often, for most schools, insufficient to cover their actual costs. And there's, an advocacy fight every single year just to get that money allocated and to have it inflate at something approaching the level of inflation. And what we see for schools is costs are rising extremely fast, and that money is just not keeping up. So the costs of keeping up school buildings are also astronomical. And many of our schools are in space that wasn't originally built as a school space. And so they have increased costs associated both with initially retrofitting and then keeping up those spaces to be appropriate for education and instruction.
I think people don't recognize that. And I think all three of you can speak to the front, Sean, before I turn to you. The number of schools that are just in buildings that were never structured. I mean, we've seen schools in old malls and retail centers.
Warehouses.
I don't think people realize that. And in the work that it takes and the mind that it takes to look at a raw space and be able to try to create a warm and safe environment from something that was not supposed to be a school.
Yeah, I do want to jump in on something that Margie said. The real impact that I'm seeing to most of my client schools right now is they are building budgets with net negative operating.
Oh, yeah.
And they are making real decisions between who to hire, how many people to hire, how do we project enrollment accurately. And they are all, where capable, dipping into reserves in order to make the numbers work, in order to deliver educational outcomes to students next year as a result of this inequity. And that's something that has happened, not consistently year over year, but this spike in fixed cost is really difficult to absorb. And the difference and why it's probably more impactful to charter schools is because any charter school that already has existing debt for the building that they have built has to first meet that debt service obligation. So everything gets pegged to that DSCR, and then you are talking about how do I make all of my classrooms staffed correctly? How do I make sure I have the right ratios? How do I make sure I have the right supplies? That is not an analysis that DCPS or any other public school system is going through when they are investing in capital and meeting their fixed costs. And that's why this impact is so magnified to the charter sector.
Yeah, you talked about reserves. So we get pinged on reserves all the time. One, not every school has reserves. That's number one. But two, the schools that can afford to have them have to have them for all the reasons you just named. If you have to be able to build year over year. If you know you need a building 5 or 6 years out, you need to have those reserves to be able to do that. And Margie, to your point, I just want to ask one more final question returning to Sean. We talked about philanthropy, something else we get dinged on. I think people still think this is the charter sector of 1999, right? Not of 2026. Philanthropy cannot match and meet the need and the demand for the number of schools that we have. And we are seeing national philanthropy change. We're seeing local philanthropy change, especially as there are other big ticket issues besides education rising to the forefront. Can you just speak to that a little bit since that's your world?
Sure, absolutely. No, the philanthropic landscape has shifted significantly over the past 5 and 10 years, but even more recently in the past 2 to 3 years. There are fewer education resources flowing in general nationally and certainly locally as well, both among national funders and among local funders. We've seen some local funders sunset as well. And so there still are philanthropic dollars, but they are significantly more limited. And in the facility space, I think it's important to note they are almost all loan dollars and not grant dollars. And so there is funding available per se, but a loan is very different from a grant and obviously has to be paid back. So even if you're getting some preferential terms, it is still money that ultimately you have to pay back. And the point that Eli's making, you have to have the reserves in place to be able to make payments on those loans. And sometimes there are really strict limitations, as he's speaking to, about what you have to be able to do that, or even to qualify for the loans in the first place, right? So it's putting a lot of pressure, and philanthropy is only a tiny piece, unfortunately, of being able to release that pressure for the sector.
Yeah. Sean, I know you can speak to all of this with some real specificity. For those of you who don't know Statesman, it is just a phenomenal institution that does really, really great work for our young men in the city. And when you walk into that school and you see those boys in their blazers and the way they talk about their school, they deserve the world, right? And in many cases, you show them the world.
Absolutely.
Like, we can talk about Statesman's program in a little bit, but just know that he's taking those boys all over the world. But can you talk about what it is to be a founder and trying to secure and find space and what that looks like for you over the last almost decade?
Wow. Well, one, I really appreciate the discussion, and a couple of things. A loan is not a grant. A grant is not a loan. On my mind, quite obviously, when you start your school, you're starting, most of us in the charter space are starting in a matriculation model. You're going to start with a smaller number of students and then matriculate until you get to full size. And so incubators have been very helpful. And the design is that you go into a space that you incubate in and you eventually take over that space. And so that was the design with Statesman. We did 1 year with Rocket Ship. Right, we as they were incubating into their space, as they were growing into their space, they rented out space to us in our first year when we were small, and immediately the second year we couldn't fit, and so we went into a space that was perfect for incubation. But you're going into a building that built in the 60s as a school without walls. It's been retrofitted several times, but it at least was a school and could have been that. And so we now have to move. We're coming out of that space. And so it's also one of those things I think it's important to say as a CEO and a founder, we find that we have to become an expert at something for a period of time necessary, and then we let go of it. And so I have become a real estate expert, right, in D.C. For the last 2 to 3 years trying to figure out. It is very difficult. We serve Ward 7 and Ward 8, where the city's density in terms of population is highest, and a population of students who have severe trauma and severe levels of poverty. And not everybody can get their kid across the river. And so we want to stay in that area. It is very hard to find space in that area. And so we are bouncing around trying to find spaces that we can again retrofit. We will pay millions of dollars up front to get into the building, which is why those reserves become important. And then we will go from a rather favorable rent condition where the cost of what we were paying to be in the space was just a little bit more, just a little bit less than what we were receiving, to a 150 to 175% cost for the next year. And as you know, every 7th grader in my building goes to Europe for 10 days. Every 8th grader in my building goes to South Africa. Everybody's looking at me and saying, that's where that's going to come from. And so teachers, programs, services that we provide, our kids don't pay for books. They don't pay for pencils, papers. They don't pay. They come to school. There is a bag packed and they get on a bus and we go and get on a plane. They don't pay for uniforms. We make sure that those costs that we don't all think about, right? If you got a $500 activity fee and $300 worth of uniforms that you got to buy, that will hinder you from choosing a program that might be best for your child. We have removed that. And so now it's like, oh, wait, we may have to do cost sharing with our parents, which is breaking a promise. And so this has ultimate impact on us. And of course, the amount of time that I'm spending, 25% of my time right now is on this matter.
Right. I want to just double tap on something you just said. I think it's really important. There are leaders who choose to open and structure their programs in some of the most under-resourced places in the city. And
Absolutely.
You've chosen to do that.
Absolutely.
I know you've been asked a number of times. I even asked you one time. I will not ask you again. You just said it, but I want you to kind of reiterate. Why not move to Ward 5, Ward 4?
Yeah. If we go to Ward 5 or Ward 4, there's so many more options. Mm-hmm. We'd probably save a little money. Wouldn't save on the cost, but certainly we wouldn't be paying 1.5% of what we're getting in for specifically for facilities. But we also know that the neighborhood that you situate your school in will have the greatest impact on the children in that neighborhood. We are absolutely sure that 50% of our families will climb across the river and come with us. And we're pretty sure that 50% of them won't. We chase our parents back into that building every year. We go to the homes and do the renewal documentation because we know that if we don't, there's a likelihood that the child that we are serving won't get the service completed. And so we know that if we go to Ward 5, the children who we opened that school to serve, many of them will not have access anymore.
That's right. And you also do, I think, a really phenomenal job of hiring staff and team members who are from and of the community as well.
65% of my staff are Black men. Half of them walk out of that building and they're home within 5 minutes.
Right.
They come from that community. They know that community.
That's a big deal.
That's a really big deal.
That's right. Can we talk a little bit about what it is to be co-located?
I have had several conversations with the Deputy Mayor of Education about this. I think that he would like to see more co-locations. I do not have a problem with co-locations, except that you have two programs. Two programs that Run a Statesman is a program. Like, we are built for boys. We're built for middle school boys. Middle school boys, many of whom have been impacted by trauma and poverty, or the trauma that comes from poverty. And so we need a little more room. We need to increase the number of activities that we offer. We need significantly more counseling space. The number of counselors, the number of individuals working with families and kids in that building every day is significantly higher than it is in any other school in D.C., and certainly across the nation. And so we need the space for that. Your program dictates how your space should be. It should impact how you live in a space and oftentimes the space that you choose to live in. And so clearly, a program next to you running a very different way is going to be a bit of an issue. It is also the issue that we share certain parts of the building. We share the auditorium. We share the gym. We share outside space. And so that constant maneuvering around who gets what. And as the not lead in the building, we have to take second place. And now the group that is in control of that building has decided that we are no longer needed in that space. And so they've asked us to leave. And so that puts us in a situation where if you're co-locating, how do you get control of the space in a way that allows you to accentuate your program?
Right. That's tough. And I think tough for the kids and staff trying to maneuver, but I can imagine for your students if they want to be outside or need to be in the auditorium, need to be in the gym, and there's, we can't use it today. I think that there's an impact for the culture as well.
All kinds. There have been any number. I think that the two schools have done a phenomenal job in trying to make sure that culturally our kids don't get at each other and the teachers don't get at each other. That happens so much in co-locations. It goes bad. And we've been adamant about making sure that doesn't happen, even in, breaking up is hard to do. They write songs about it. And so we're trying to do this in a way that doesn't turn into Usher Don't Get Rich from writing a song about us moving out. And we've largely done that. That said, there have been several skirmishes, run-ins, adults because of the gym. And we still have it and we still need it, but we're scheduled to be there. Oh, our graduation is today. We'll need the gym for the whole day. And so it does create a lot of issues where staff and other adults and parents, which you have less control over, can get into it with each other.
Yeah, and I just want to name that Sean's situation is not unique. We have a couple of situations like this across the city where good leaders who are trying to run strong programs are put in tough positions, and oftentimes, there's conflict because
Absolutely.
They want what's best for their students.
Absolutely.
And they're advocating for their students, and that can get a little tricky. Yeah. Margie, I'm going to turn it back to you really quickly. So D.C. is recognized as one of the leading cities in the country for public education. I think we do a very nice job here.
Yay.
How does the facilities funding gap kind of undercut the reputation? And I'm going to put a finer point on that, and Eli, feel free to jump in too on this. We know that when there are policy challenges and policy issues, banks don't like to fund us. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So, we are doing so well in so many ways, right? And the district has done a really good job, both sort of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, on recovering. And the academic data is very strong across both sectors, and charters have done an incredible job in supporting students. However, there are all these challenges that we've just spoken to, right, with facilities that impact that progress. That, again, a lot of this comes down, unfortunately, to dollars and cents, right? And it impacts the bottom line and what resources school leaders like Sean have to put back into their classrooms, and not to be spending on their building search or retrofitting their building or whatever needs to happen. So that's a huge challenge. And when we also have, I will say, like the uncertainty around some of the funding at the both national level, but at the local level too, and it's not clear that, the UPSFF, the student funding formula that Eli spoke to, or the facilities funding that Sean spoke to, is going to increase. That also creates challenges, and Eli can speak to this, with schools, with planning, with balance sheets, with seeking loans, with getting funding, et cetera, because they don't have a guarantee that they can offer, right? So lenders do not like ambiguity, right? And so that creates a lot of challenge. So that makes it difficult for schools sometimes to get the kind of funding that they need to support facilities work. So all of these pieces of the inadequate funding, what it requires for schools, the uncertainty in funding and what that requires for schools, and then the external outcomes of that make then getting funding harder. It's this sort of vicious cycle that schools get stuck in that makes it really hard to focus on the core, really challenging work that Sean and other leaders are trying to do of supporting students to success. So these pieces are all unfortunately linked, and I'm sure Eli may want to add too.
Yeah, I would love to jump in there. I think when lenders are evaluating schools, they care about a few key things. There's a lot of different metrics on the sheet that they're evaluating and adding, but it comes down to what's your enrollment, how many days of cash on hand do you have, what's your branding position, and what's the regulatory environment. If you can get a yes on all of those, yeah, you're great. You're probably going to get a loan. And if you zoom out just from charter schools for a second and look at the district as a whole, we used to have a AAA bond rating. We lost our AAA bond rating not because we have less cash in the bank, but because the regulatory environment changed, the political environment changed. And that's a microcosm of what is happening for all of these charter schools, because now not only do I have to say I have money in the bank, I have to account for the regulatory environment, the absence of consistency of funding. We are going to have to answer in the loan process. What happens if you don't get that fixed cost increase? What happens if the UPSF changes next year? What happens? It's on that charter school to account for that what if. And so it makes obtaining the loan even more difficult. And it means that you have to have more money in the bank to account for that risk. And so all of those things kind of add up and have this downstream impact on what type of building you can build. And Sean said something brilliant. Everything that Sean said was brilliant. But he said something that was really important in terms of facilities and facilities development, is your program should drive the space. And so what ends up happening is you are settling. And you are settling, and it has a decades-long impact. How long is your lease in that space? How long are you going to take to build a building that just doesn't meet your needs? Because it's the only thing you can do in this moment. So you're trying to have these trade-offs that are just really, really unfair, that have lasting impacts. When you look at all of that, I think there has got to be some kind of predictability. And we are still far ahead of every other district in the country in terms of how we support charter schools and how the charter schools operate and the educational outcomes, but it doesn't mean that we're perfect. And so these are the finer points that we really need to drill in on and understand when it comes to how charter schools actually operate and fund their buildings.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're far ahead because we built a foundation in this city, right? And now we're backtracking. It's like, why would you backtrack on things that are working and where progress is being made?
The backtracking, I think, it's just been incremental.
Yeah.
Like year over year, just a little bit here, a little bit there, and it's all solvable, and we can all deal with it. But we've kind of gotten to this point where there's so many factors that the industry is dealing with that we have to push back, and we have to get back to the underlying intent. And you had a really great previous podcast episode where you laid out what was the idea behind the School Reform Act. Like, why did we have charter schools in the first place? And what was the intent of our funding structures? And I think we need to re-anchor to that. And I think we need to re-anchor that as a whole of government approach. What is it that we're here to do? We're here to educate kids. We're here to invest in the future. It's not charter schools. It's not public schools. It's about the outcome. And that's what we need to re-anchor to. And I think that will help us think big in terms of how do we solve some of these problems because, as Sean was saying, I don't know that we return to an era where we can just build buildings. And we certainly can't build buildings in the areas where Sean needs it because those are really difficult to build. So how do we take advantage of all of the different resources that might be there? It's going to take some creative solutions. And I think if we're focused on the outcomes rather than the inputs, that's going to help us a lot.
Yeah. I agree with all of that. It's so challenging in a city like D.C. too. When you talk about just building buildings, there's no where do you put them? There's no space to just pop that up in a different city like a New York or Chicago or Jersey or Philly where there might be a little bit more flexibility. You only go so many places, right? Yep. The podcast you just referred to, go back and watch that if you have not seen that podcast. One of the things I think about quite a bit, you named enrollment as one of the factors, right? That lenders look at. So does philanthropy. For the few entities that exist that are still giving funding around facilities, they're also looking at how's your enrollment, what's the policy environment, and they'll ask these questions. They ask DC Alliance these questions all the time. They think about making investments. And one of the through lines from that earlier podcast around enrollment, enrollment will shift in this city. It's an affordability issue. And if we want to keep folks in the city, the schools have to be good and we have to have the spaces for them. And I don't think people are always making those connections. It is so much easier if you're in Ward 7 to then just go to Ward 9. For those of you who know Ward 9 is, that is outside the city of Maryland, right? It's easy to do that, but we want to keep our families here and keep them invested in our programs. Margie, I want to talk to you about the Equitable Facilities Fund because you've been working on this for a very, very, very long time. And just like a note about my board member, because I did say this in my introduction to my board member, and also Ed Forward is a strong partner. The CEO of BC was on a previous podcast. Margie has worked so hard on this fund. Long before it had a name, before we knew what we were doing, long before she's just been in it for a long time. So I just want to just say to Margie and to Ed Forward, yes, thank you, because this has been her baby, and it's been very, very hard to get off the ground. And there are very few places in the country doing what Margie has just helped to launch. So can you talk about? Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So I came to Ed Forward 8 years ago now and recognized immediately that facilities were a huge challenge for the schools in our portfolio. It was not news to me because I'd previously worked in the deputy mayor's office where we tried to wrench buildings free from the school system, and that generally went poorly. So it was clear that we needed to try to provide support because it was just an incredible challenge that unfortunately has only gotten more severe over time. Putting it all together is extremely hard, as you mentioned. Lots of people, lots of players, and also just needing to get a frankly large infusion of philanthropic capital to get it off the ground, figure out the right structure, figure out a framework that would work for the diverse array of charter schools that we have in the city, some of which are much larger, some of which are very small, and the wide range of needs across the charter space, which include finding a brand new site, getting out of a challenging lease and refinancing potentially, adding a gym when you really need a gym gym and have absolutely no space for your children to do athletics or something like that. So there's a broad array of needs. So worked for a very long time with a variety of folks, and finally in May launched the DC Charter Facilities Fund, which again provides loans, I will say, not grants, but is a $250 million revolving loan fund that has different loan products that are available to charter schools for all kinds of things, including long-term financing for a big building, for renovation, for a smaller project, for leasehold improvements, for land banking, lots of different uses. So we tried to structure it in a way that could really be very flexible and meet the diverse needs of the sector, and can give loans that are a couple $100,000 all the way up to like $30 or $40 million, right? But again, these are loans, and they are at really, really competitive rates, thanks to the philanthropy involved, that can save schools a lot of money in terms of the loan repayments that they're making versus what would be available on the private market. But they're still loans, and they have to be paid back. And it's a revolving loan fund so that hopefully for decades to come, this will be available as a source of lending for charter schools in the city. So we hope it's an important contribution in terms of helping meet the needs for schools that need loans and need to qualify for something that in some cases is more flexible than what banks can provide, and we hope at a better rate than what banks can provide. But it is, despite how much work is taken and how much capital is involved, still not a solution to all the facilities challenges in the city. So we're also really aware of that and want to keep pushing, especially on all these advocacy pieces that both Sean and Eli have talked about, to really address the fundamental structural issues and the fundamental underlying inequity across the sectors that will really provide the long-term, I would say, solution that schools need to address their problems. So we're really proud and really excited and happy with the fund, and we know it's only one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, but thank you so much for the work you've done on this, and thank you to the philanthropy that has been actively involved. Can you just give us a 10-second primer on what revolving loan means? Because there are people I know who are watching this. We're all nerds, so we know this stuff. But who are like, what are you talking about?
So the fund is structured in a way that it makes loans out directly to schools, and then those loans are obviously repaid. Just like you pay your mortgage every month, those loans are repaid, and those repayments go back into the fund so that the money is sort of recycled and can be loaned out again and again over time. So the goal that it is ultimately self-sustaining over time, and again, will last decades and be able to continue loaning capital out. And as it's paid back, right, it goes and can be loaned again to another school.
Thank you for that. Eli, I'm turning to you now.
All right.
So this facilities playbook that the DC Alliance has put together has been a labor of love. Is it 186 pages? I didn't look this morning. I think it is.
Every time I get a phone call from you and your team, it grows just a little bit.
It's not that long, but it is very, very long. It was definitely one of those like Adobe click, and it like took a while to download when I got the first draft. And I was like, Eli, please, can you talk a bit about the playbook? What gap is it designed to fill?
Yeah, I think if you go back to what Sean said, of each executive director, head of a school, they've got to be an expert on something, and then they got to put it down. Most charter school leaders are going to build a building once, and how do you know what you don't know? And so after working with a number of charter schools, building buildings across the district, the gap that I saw was charter leaders were making basic mistakes at the outset of the capital project, and then dealing and calling me to help unwind as many of those decisions and poor foundations as possible during the construction phase. And all of that has a cost implication. So how do we educate charter sector leaders and their operations people to be experts in the moment? And so the playbook is not a blow-by-blow of here's how you build a building. It's a blow-by-blow of how do I as a leader lead effectively? How do I understand what it is that I need to do and when I need to do it? And it's a document that you do not have to read from start to finish. If you are having trouble sleeping, maybe you read it from start to finish. I love it, but what it does is it gives charter leaders an opportunity to say, I'm thinking about a long-term lease. What is it that I need to be thinking about? What are the lease terms that I need to be looking for? How do I protect myself? Who do I hire to protect me? And what is their role? And what should I be looking at? How can I fund them through the project? So rather than charter leaders stumbling around in the dark or getting bad advice, now we've got a document that's a living document that we can continue to update as we experience what happens in the marketplace. But it's a go-to resource for charter leaders to quickly get up to speed on what it is that they need to know and what they need to be doing and where they need to be putting their focus so they set themselves, their schools, and their students up for a lot of success. Because these are foundational investments. If you're going to loan $20, $30, $40 million, that is the future of your school. And you have got to do it correctly, or you're always going to be hamstrung in one way, shape, or form over the course of that loan until you are able to rectify it, till you have enough capital to correct a decision that you made. And so taking the time to read this and ask for advice from the right people is going to go a long way towards ensuring success.
I have to thank you for the explanation, but I have to just thank you for the time that you've put into this. And also I have to give a shout out to DC Alliance Chief of Staff and CFO Rachel Johnston, who really led this project. Yep. She is very close, like the watching the schools struggle through one of the biggest financial decisions that they make, and she's sitting with them having to try to navigate some of those things. And you talked about unwinding tough decisions. This was, I think, a labor of love and a passion project for her as well. So since she's not here, I just want to say that this is her,
Yeah, Rachel's great. And I have to jokingly say that when we started this initiative, we were just going to do a one-page handout for every presentation.
I recall, because that was what came to my desk. What I was told in our check-in was just this one pager to help schools out, and I said, "Okay, sure, that sounds great." That is not the PDF that I received.
That is not where we ended.
Yeah.
But I think we evolved to a place where we have a product that is going to address so many core issues and set the Charter Alliance up to be able to say, you should look at this page when you get a question, or a charter leader can go and independently do that. And so I think it puts you on the front lines that, mirrors and is the resource that helps things like this investment fund. We put dollars in the right places, and we are putting dollars and we are lowering the risk of that investment in a really meaningful way. Because the other part, I gave you 4 things that lenders look for, but they are investing in charter leaders.
That's right.
They are investing in their vision and their ability and their leadership ability. And so if they can walk in there and demonstrate a requisite level of knowledge on how they can be successful in a capital project, they're more likely to get money walking out the door.
Absolutely. If you have not seen the playbook, you can reach out to anyone at the DC Alliance. We all have it. We are distributing it freely. It is a free, it is a gift to the sector, and particularly to my smaller single site or small network members. This is for you, right? For our bigger schools, they'll figure it out. They've done this before. They have multiple buildings. But if you're a new leader in and you're trying to navigate this, do not do it by yourself. The playbook is there, but also we now have resources to help you navigate before you jump into a decision that is the biggest decision that you'll make for the foreseeable future for the term of your school. I want to turn to Sean. So you have been pretty outspoken on most policy issues that affect charter schools, which we appreciate. Thank you so much. Sometimes it's hard to get folks to come out. Not Sean.
I got something to say.
All the time. I love it. It's really helpful. We are obviously in the middle of the FY27 budget fight right now, as we do. We have just had a initial vote. We'll have a final vote later sometime in the summer. Make it end. What's one thing right now that you want to say to our current council about the budget, particularly around facilities, the allotment, and what's something that you want to say to our future council and mayor, because we have an election around the corner?
I really appreciate that question. I think I would say to our current council, I want to start with a thank you to the council and the mayor. I've been in the city for 16 years, and every year but one, I think, there has been an increase in funding to schools. I particularly was impacted by the way that our mayor and the council walked us through COVID, brought the sectors together, brought all of us together, and really walked our families as we shepherded a community through like a 100-year epidemic, and so there is a resonant commitment to the public education of children, especially those who are furthest from opportunity. Where we continue to fail is in this space of facilities, and it's just a blight. It is a blight on the reputable leadership of reputable tenure of the current mayor. to stand in the space of this and to have been the leader as all of this has played out in a way that now turns into tens of millions of dollars that is visible and present. And I know that this mayor and this council is committed to the children who need it the most. Where you put them, where you have them stand up every day, right? Like, I want to go into a building and the faucets in the bathroom aren't for show. Water should come out of every faucet. Every toilet should flush. Like, that's what charters are forced to deal with every day. That should be unacceptable when you have a sector of schools where everything is brand new. It's just unacceptable to say that all children are under my purview in public education and allow for that to happen. And so I think while I'm saying thank you for a consummate commitment to the public education of children, again, those furthest from opportunity, you can't go into the building and have the building show you as ugly. And so we just need to fix that. To those who are coming onto the council, coming into city leadership, fix this immediately. Fix this immediately. It is not even necessary. It is unacceptable, unprofessional, inappropriate, and unnecessary. We should not be doing this. I will be thanking you immediately of leaders in this city. I'm the first person to say thank you for what you have done. I will be thanking you, and I will be in your face about like water fountains not working in the building. That is don't lie to the kids. You push the little button, water should come out. That's it. And I think that charter leaders, you cannot look at the children in the charter sector, the teachers in the public charter sector, and think of them as less, or that they should have less, or that they deserve less, or that they should have to fight harder. I am going to have to look at programming and staff if this doesn't get right. Don't make me do that.
That's right. Thank you for that. And as a reminder, and I say this almost on every podcast, DC public charter schools are still almost half the district. And so what we're saying is, you really cannot underfund half the public school students in the city. It's just a blight. So to your point, fix this immediately.
Fix this immediately.
Yep. Okay, I think I have one more question for everyone. And it dovetails nicely with Sean's last answer. So beyond the playbook, what else needs to be in place to truly support charter leaders navigating facilities? I think all of you have hit on this a little bit, but just like our 30-second closeout. Eli, I'm starting with you.
I think it depends on how big you want to go. I think that we have to look for creative solutions to space issues because we are constrained. We don't have more land. So how do we take a whole of government approach to this? How do we find co-located spaces? How do we make more underutilized government spaces available for charter schools? How do we leverage the district's buying power in order to do that? So I think if we're looking at this, maybe we're creating a public financing corporation and leveraging our ability to buy land and buy buildings and build buildings for charter schools at a lower rate that the district is enjoying when it loans money. I think if we want to come down to like what could we do tomorrow, I think that we have to get educated on the economics of running charter schools at the government level. And we have to understand the nuances and the trade-offs because what a school leader at DCPS manages, which is a lot, is totally different from what a charter school leader manages in terms of budgeting educational outcomes. They have to make trade-offs. And I don't think that those nuances are readily identifiable at the key levels of our leadership in the city government.
That's right. Yep. And I want to be clear. We are often, we say this often, we are making a comparison between DC charters and DCPS, but we want them to get their money too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
We want them to also be able to serve their kids well and also have great buildings that keep their kids safe, warm, and dry. All of that. We just also need it for, and to your point, what our leaders navigate when they are their own entity. It's one of the hardest jobs in the world.
It's incredibly hard. And I've sat on both sides, right? So I've been the guy that everybody calls when the water fountains don't work at DCPS. Those maintenance issues and those challenges exist across both sectors in a very real way. DCPS has less control over it than necessarily a charter school does. But the facilities investment and the facilities maintenance, that's something that we've really got to make some strategic investments across both sectors to have equitable outcomes. But again, I think if we educate ourselves on the economics of what it looks like to run a charter school business, we're going to be in a better place. And I think we'll have better outcomes as a result.
Thank you for that. Margie?
Yeah, I think Eli spoke to, there's some creative sort of government ideas and investment ideas that we could leverage, and I think we should be more creative in our approach to some of these things. And I think educating government is crucial. But I think at the end of the day, it's the issue we talked about the fundamental funding inequity, right? Both across operational funding and facilities funding, because I just feel like if we don't fix that, we're just continuing to cobble together things that are like never going to fundamentally address the issue. And charter school students are public school students. They should not be second-class citizens. It's illegal. The formula for a reason for all students. And I mean, it's just immoral to be treating them as otherwise. So I think we just have to help people understand more and then just hold a really firm line that it's unacceptable politically and in every other way to treat charter school students like they're not public school students and they're not our kids, because they fundamentally are.
That's right. And Sean, you talked about the policy, but what do you need right now as a school leader, and what do you hear from your peers?
From my contemporaries, equal to my own experience, adaptive and technical, right? Technical, we need to all understand the condition of our facility. The condition of our facility, kind of like the whole of it. Where are we now? Where are we going to go? What will that look like? What the cost of that is? We need a better understanding of how facilities impacts the programmatic decisions that we're going to end up making, because we will end up having to make programmatic decisions. Adaptively, I think that the entire sector needs a deep immersion in the reality of this situation, so that everyone can have an emotional and real attachment to what it means that this gap exists and that this is having an impact on the decision. We are going to be held accountable for outcomes. Some part of those outcomes, I would say a significant part of it, will be based on facilities, because costs and all the other decisions that come down from that will impact the decisions that we make. I don't want to cost share with my parents. They can't afford it. And so I want everyone to have a deep personal appreciation for what it means to be in a beautiful space that allows you to accentuate your program, and at the same time that the costs don't take away from you being able to provide service and program to families.
Thank you. And thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. I just really appreciate it. Eli, I've learned so much from you in the last year. I cannot express to you how grateful I am for your thought partnership with the DC Alliance, for doing this podcast, but also just answering all of our questions and helping to put together this really valuable resource that is not only being used in DC, but I've also forwarded around to all of my Charter School Association peers around the country. And they're like, what is this? I'm like, you can do this too. So you might be getting some other phone calls.
I look forward to it, and it's been such a pleasure.
Yes.
So thank you.
And Margie, thank you so much. You're both, again, an expert in philanthropy, but also just one of our strongest and longest term board members, and also the person that I call often when things are not great. So thank you for listening to me and all of my frustrations about all the things. And Sean, I just, what you are doing at Statesman is incredible. It is a national model. And people should know the good work that you're doing. Statesman is the kind of school, is the reason that advocates like us, the DC Alliance, why we get up and do what we do, because otherwise this work is really hard. But then you walk into a school like Statesman and you're like, oh, okay, it's totally fine to get beat up by counsel a little bit, because this is the outcome is for these boys. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yep. I appreciate you all so much. Thanks, y'all.